great. If you've been with us the past couple of weeks, we've been in the book of Nehemiah. And in Nehemiah, we're looking at a man who was tasked with rebuilding the walls of Jerusalem. They were in captivity and exile in Babylon, and he goes back to Jerusalem, and he says, I've got to do something about this. And as we've looked at the past couple of weeks, there have been some really positive things that have happened. They begin building, all this good work is happening. But today we're going to see they come against opposition. And really, we're answering the question today, what do we do when we come against opposition in our lives? When we have a task, a dream, a vision that God has given us, how do we continue despite the opposition? And to get into this today, I need to just ask you to indulge me for just a minute to talk about my favorite sports team in the world, Arsenal Football Club. I heard a couple groans from my Liverpool fans out there. No, most people don't have any clue what I'm talking about because this is British soccer. This is like overseas, like European stuff. It's like, why do we care? Like, what about baseball, football, basketball? I don't care. All I care about is soccer. It's true, right? It's like literally all I care about. In fact, yesterday I spent 4 hours at a bar with the people at 9 a.m. watching a soccer game, right? It's like, that's how much I care about soccer. Well, to indulge me for a second, Arsenal for 22 years have been waiting to get back to win the championship. Last Sunday, while I was here at church, they clinched the Premier League title. And this is what the celebrations looked like right here. Well, it was less pixelated, but it looked amazing. Look at the joy on those guys' faces. See, I look at these guys and I think these are my buddies now. Like, they know who I am, I know who they are, they're my people. But what I love about this picture is that this encapsulates 22 years, which for some of us, think about the Dodgers, right? When they win the World Series, that's a big deal, right? We're Dodgers fans, like, let's go Dodgers. They've won the World thing a few times, World Series, they know, they're good. 22 years waiting for this, and finally, they clinched it. Through all the years of hardship and sadness and confusion and what's happening with our club, it's not becoming the same anymore. Going through all of that. In fact, the past 3 years, they've come second. Now, I don't know if you've ever come second in something, but when you come second, it feels like you just lost, right? You're the first loser is what they say about it. In fact, they would go to all the different stadiums that they would play at, all 21 other stadiums, and every time they'd show up, you know what the other fans would say? Second again, ole, ole, second again. 3 years in a row, every single game, people chanting second again. Every single time. And as a fan, that was terrible. I hated that. But now we get to sing champions again, ole, ole. We've been champions, as if I did anything to make this happen. What I love about Arsenal is, like, why am I talking about this? They overcame these obstacles, right? Any sports team that you support, you know the kind of like the journey that people go on, the personal journeys, the internal struggle, the external opposition, all of this, they just get over all of it to get over the line. What does that have to do with you? Well, first of all, you're fans of sports, but more importantly, you have a greater mission than winning a championship. You have a greater mission than just trying to win some sporting event. Each one of us has given a calling by God himself to do something amazing with our lives. And each one of us has to then ask the question, how do we get over the line? How do we continue in the faith? How do we continue in the calling God has called us to? How do we do all of these things when opposition comes against us? Because it's not really a question of if opposition is going to come. It's a question of when opposition comes, what do you do about it? And that is what we're going to talk about today. When this opposition comes, when you start that nonprofit and you run up against financial burdens and you think, I don't know how we're going to make it, how do you find the strength to keep going? When you jump into a job that you love, but then things get really hard, how do you keep going? When the marriage of your dreams turns into anything but dreamy, how do you keep going? How do you continue to show up when you encounter trials and tribulations? When the dreams that you had for your life feel like they're just falling apart around you, how do you keep showing up every single day and pick up a brick and keep building? Whatever we're set out to do, like I said, we're guaranteed one thing, that we will face opposition. And so when we look at this story of Nehemiah, it's no different for him as it is for us. There was a task that they were called to do, and they had to continue to build despite the opposition. So today, I just want to put this up right at the very beginning. We're going to talk through these 4 points, that when we build something to last, this is how we do it. We remember God, we fortify our defenses, we refuse compromise, and we ask for another brick. We do those 4 things. We remember God, we fortify our defenses, we refuse compromise, and we ask for another brick. And so today, as we get into the passage, if you remember where we've been, or even if you're new today, I'll just catch us up really briefly. Nehemiah has gone to Jerusalem. He's rallied the people. He's actually seen favor from God, from the king, from the people. Everywhere he goes, there has been favor up until the point that we're going to talk about today. Because everything he's been doing, he's saying, this is God's mission for us. This is what we're going to do. And everyone rallies together. But as hinted in chapter 2, there's a little bit of opposition that's kind of stirring. And today, as we get into Nehemiah 4, we're going to see the opposition come to the forefront. So we're going to jump right into Nehemiah 4 today. And we're just going to read this, verse 1, chapter 4. When Sanballat, what a great name, heard that we were rebuilding the wall, he became angry and was greatly incensed. He ridiculed the Jews, and in the presence of his associates and the army of Samaria, he said, "What are those feeble Jews doing? Will they restore their wall? Will they offer sacrifices? Will they finish in a day? Can they bring the stones back to life from those heaps of rubble, burned as they are?" And Tobiah the Ammonite piles on, who was at his side. He said, "What are they building? Even a fox climbing up on it would break down their wall of stone." These guys do not want Jerusalem to succeed. They do not want the Israelite people to succeed. They're angry. They're against them. In fact, Sanballat was the governor of Samaria. And if you remember the Samaritan, the Good Samaritan story, he was the beginning of all this Samaria thing. Samaritans and Jews did not like each other. In fact, they hated each other. And it goes way back in time. But this is one of those moments that kind of cements it. Samaria is against Jerusalem. And he's angry because he doesn't want Jerusalem to be rebuilt. And the thing is that when you're angry about someone doing something, what is your natural response? You want to bully them. You want to tear them down. You want to stop them from doing what they're called to do, right? He calls the Jews feeble, weak, hopeless, foolish. He's openly mocking them, and he's also openly mocking God. Because he's saying, what, are you just going to make these stones come to life? Like he's literally saying, does your God, is he actually going to build this up for you? It's worthless. Why are you doing this? So he's opposed because Jerusalem's prosperity means that Samaria wouldn't prosper, right? When there's a strong nation or strong people around you, you tend to not be the people that get all the attention and credit and whatnot. In fact, they don't align. They're at odds. They can't flourish if they're flourishing. This kind of idea of if they're flourishing, I'm not happy. Have you ever had that feeling? The Germans have a word for it. It's called Schadenfreude. Anyone heard of Schadenfreude? It means you get pleasure out of somebody else's pain. That's what Sanballat's doing. He's like, your pain is going to be my pleasure, or your pleasure is now my pain. In fact, to take you back to Arsenal really fast, because I know you guys want to go back there. There's crosstown rivals called Tottenham. They're literally like a couple miles from one another, and they hate each other. They hate each other. Why? Well, because they're crosstown rivals. So when they succeed, the other one wants to fail. When the other one fails, the other one feels like they're succeeding. In fact, Arsenal win the league. Tottenham were this close to being kicked out of the league completely. That would have been the greatest year of my life. If I could see my enemies not just fail, but completely fall out of the league, let's go, right? That's a little bit of Schadenfreude for you. But every single one of us, we have that. When our enemies don't do well, we feel like we win. Another man, Tobiah, another enemy of Jerusalem, adds insult to injury, right? He uses this phrase, even a fox climbing up on your walls would break it down. What a silly phrase. But the idea, he's actually poking at something real about Jerusalem. So Jerusalem's walls used to be almost 20 feet thick. Like imagine, like the size of this stage, that's how thick the walls were. But this time when they're rebuilding, it tells us that the walls were anywhere from like 9 to 10 feet wide. So it was like half of this. So from here to here, is that a thick wall? That's still a pretty thick, I mean, that's a lot thicker than the walls in my house, you know? I can hear everything in my rooms. Like this 9 to 10 feet, that's still a massive wall. But to these people, they were trying to find any way they could to get at them. Your walls aren't as thick as they used to be. As if that was going to do something. But the amazing thing was, these insults could have derailed the Israelites. In fact, as we see later, it will derail them somewhat. It takes out their confidence in themselves and their mission. But Nehemiah has a plan. Now, Nehemiah doesn't just have a plan to rebuild the walls. Nehemiah has a plan to fight against the opposition. He starts with what we need to start with, and that is that we need to remember that God is with us. The first way to combat any opposition in your life is to remember that God is with you. Remember God. Verse 4, this is his response to these guys trying to rag him and trying to get him to stop. He says this, "Hear us, our God, for we are despised. Turn their insults back on their own heads. Give them over as plunder in a land of captivity." Just like in chapter 1, if you remember Nehemiah's response when he heard about Jerusalem being broken down, Nehemiah turns first and foremost to the Lord. That's always the place that we want to start, is always go to God and remember God first. But what's interesting about his prayer is not just, God, would you help prosper us? He actually prays very specifically, God, would you tear down our enemies? Have you ever had that prayer? When people have come against you, Lord, smite my enemies. In the Psalms, we call it the imprecatory Psalms, the ones where literally we say, God, would you punish somebody else? Which I don't know how I feel about like actually praying that, but we see Nehemiah praying this because he's saying they are coming against not just us, but God, they are coming against you. And Lord, would you smite them? Would you tear them down? And we're actually going to come back to this prayer at the end of the message. But for now, we're going to move on, remembering God, because the people, they're intimidated. They trust, though, Nehemiah and God, and so they keep building. And so Sanballat and these others, they go from just like empty words of just like ridicule, and they actually go to threats. We ratchet it up in verse 11. It says, also, our enemy said, before they know it or see us, we will be right there among them, and we will kill them and put an end to their work. They're not just making fun of them anymore. Now they're threatening their lives. Hey, if you keep going like this, we're going to kill you. That would scare anyone. That would scare me. If somebody came to me and said, hey, if you keep trying to build that church, we're literally going to kill you. I'd be really tempted to say, maybe not today. Maybe we'll hold off on this whole thing. And the thing is, for the people, the threats, they begin to work. The people begin to listen and become afraid and frightened and lose heart. In fact, 4 to 5 times in this Nehemiah passage, we see that they cry out or raise concern. See, they're concerned. They're noticing everyone. Like, just imagine there were picketers right outside of our doors here. And you come in, you would express concern to me. Jonathan, do you know what's happening outside our walls? Do you know what's going on right there? They're coming against us. What do we do? They feel trapped. They feel discouraged. In fact, the word that says they came among them actually means that they were surrounded. They had people around them on all sides. Maybe they want to stop the work now. Maybe this isn't God's will. Maybe, are we sure this is what God had for us? Have you ever felt discouraged to the point of wanting to give up in your life? I have. Lots of times, in lots of different ways. But one of the times I remember was quite a few years ago when I was working at Friends Church Orange. We wanted to start a program called Alpha. Now, if you don't know much about Alpha, Alpha is really this outreach tool where we say, we believe that there are people that have questions that want to come and they want to just ask and have this open space. And I had seen it work. I'd seen it work in London. I had seen it work in LA. And I was like, we're going to do it in Orange. And we started, we prayed. I had this team. First night, one person shows up. And I was like, oh, okay, that's a bummer, but maybe next night, right? Next night, 2 people show up. Oh, great. Third night, 1 person shows up. Fourth night, it continues on, just 1, 2, 1, 2. Couple nights, nobody shows up. That goes on for like multiple years, not just one time. And I'm beginning as a leader to say, this is my job to like grow numbers. So like, what am I doing wrong? Maybe this isn't God's will. Maybe God doesn't want us to do this year after year. Then COVID hits. We had like 10 people, then it went down to 0 again. It's like, were like, maybe this isn't what God has for us. But there was something about it that I knew. I was like, no, God's telling us to keep working on this. God's telling us to continue, even though no one's showing up, even though it feels like there's opposition coming against us. Last year, Friends Church Orange hosted over 100 people in their Alpha course. That's one of those things that as I look at it, I'm like, I never had 100 people. Like, what was I doing wrong? But the thing is, it's not about me. It's that God was building something. And God wasn't calling me to get a lot of people. God was calling me to be faithful to what he called me to do, despite whatever opposition comes. It's the same thing with each of us. When we have big dreams, things that God has told us to do, despite what's happening, despite the opposition, God says, continue, keep going at it. And the first way we do that is that we remember our God. The second thing we see for Nehemiah is that they fortify their defenses. So not only do we need to remember God, but secondly, we need to fortify our defenses. Because as the people are coming to Nehemiah and saying, now they want to kill us, Nehemiah's like, I have to do something about this. And so he goes to verse 13 and he says this, therefore, I stationed some of the people behind the lowest points of the wall at the exposed places. I like that phrase, exposed places, because he doesn't station them at all the parts of the wall. The 20 feet part that like has like parapets and everything and people that's fine. They're not going to climb that. But there's these gaps. There's these open holes. Literally the word is just like those open spaces in the wall where literally you could just walk right over and walk right in. That's where he fortified the defenses. He put people there. And it's such an easy application to us, but where are your exposed places? Where are your weak spots? Maybe you don't even know. Maybe you're like, I don't know, I'm just working, I'm doing my life. But if you think about it, where is the enemy attacking you? Spiritually, relationally, wanting to eat up your time, morally, things where you've kind of let slip. You're like, that's not as big of a deal. Those are your exposed places. Each one of us have those. in our lives, and we are actually foolish if we don't fortify the exposed places in our lives, because we have to be equipped for battle all the time. Because it's not just that if the battle comes at some point, it's when the battle comes, which might be right this second. Are you prepared? Are you fortified? Are you even aware? Galatians 5 tells us to put on the full armor of God, not so that we can just go out and fight away, but that we can actually stand firm. That's the whole reason, so that we can stand in what God has called us to do. Shoring up our defenses is really just a courageous act of obedience to what God has called us to do. And the thing is this, you might be thinking, okay, well, I've got to ask God if he wants me to do this or not. You don't need to ask God. He's already told you. You have to shore up your defenses. In fact, all of Scripture says shore up those areas where you're weak. And if you can't do it, get others around you to help you. Find a way to shore up the gaps. Because if you have gaps, that's where not only will the opposition come against you, the opposition will get you and get inside. No matter how prepared we are, we fight not against flesh and blood, but against spiritual forces. And so yes, we are prepared. Yes, we need to shore up our defenses. And we need to go back and remember God. Because God is the one who does the protecting. In fact, Nehemiah, we see this in verse 14. He says, okay, I posted all these people. I did all the physical stuff I can do. And then he said, after I looked things over, I stood up and I said to the nobles, the officials, and the rest of the people, don't be afraid of them. What does he say? Remember the Lord, who is great and awesome. In fact, so many times in Nehemiah, he uses the word remember. To be like, God, remember us. People, remember God. God, remember the enemies. Remember, remember, remember. Because what God's done in the past, God will do in the future. God does not change. So remember the Lord, who is great and awesome. He's provided in the past, and he will provide in the future. And then Nehemiah puts on his kilt, and he paints his face half blue, and he gets on his horse, and he pulls out his claymore, and he has his Braveheart moment. He says this, the second half. He says, remember the Lord, who is great and awesome, and fight for your families, your sons and your daughters. Fight for your wives, and fight for your homes. Just imagine him riding on this horse like, sons of Scotland. And he's just back and forth. He's like, let's fight. Do you remember what Nehemiah was? Was he a warrior? He was a cupbearer. And yet God called him to lead his people against the opposition. When the time came for action, Nehemiah was the one who stood up and led his people. Friends, I don't know what role you have in your life, but when God calls you to something, God's going to equip you to do it. God is going to equip you not just to lead yourself, but to lead others around you, whether it's in your business or your home or your church. God has given you a calling, and he calls you to be brave like Nehemiah, brave like William Wallace, and to stand in the gap and inspire people to what God is calling us to. After this epic speech, we see Nehemiah then equips the people. He doesn't just tell them to stand and fight. He's like, and here's some weapons. And so now they're working on the walls, but they also have their weapons right next to them. And some people got swords strapped to their sides. And they're like, we're ready, we're prepared, we're doing the work, but we're prepared for the opposition. Both at the same time. They didn't stop, they continued. We need to expect this opposition as well and live like this. 1 Peter 5:8 says, be alert and be of sober mind. Your enemy, the devil, prowls around like a roaring lion looking for someone to devour. And if we're not prepared, you just might be the next lion's food. If we're not prepared. Opposition comes from the outside. We have to expect it. We have to be ready. We have to be prepared and mind our gaps. But opposition can also come from the inside, which is where we turn next into chapter 5. Nehemiah prepares the people for the outside opposition, but now there's opposition on the inside. Nehemiah 5:1. It says, now the men and their wives raised a great outcry against their fellow Jews. No longer is it against the people out there, but it's the people within our own walls. Some were saying, we and our sons and daughters are numerous. In order for us to eat and stay alive, we must get grain. Others were saying, we are mortgaging our fields, our vineyards, and our homes to get grain during the famine. And still others were saying, we've had to borrow money to pay the king's tax on our fields and our vineyards. Although we're of the same flesh and blood as our fellow Jews, and though our children are as good as theirs, yet we have to subject our sons and daughters to slavery. Some of our daughters have already been enslaved, but we are powerless because our fields and our vineyards belong to others. Because of the broken walls, Jerusalem did not have an economy. They did not have agriculture. They couldn't protect their own stuff. And so they literally are going through a famine at this time. And the people within the walls of Jerusalem are starving. And some of them who were rich and had extra land, and it was like, no problem, we'll just go buy food, we'll go figure it out. Like, we got commerce, we got stores. But for a lot of the people, it was a big deal to not have food every single day. They had to take drastic measures. They had to mortgage their fields. They had to mortgage their vineyards. They had to mortgage their homes, literally just to have food to eat. Not only did they do that, but they had to borrow money by selling their kids as slaves to each other. And Nehemiah comes into this mess, and he says, man, what are we doing? He says, if we were under attack or under siege from any other foreign nation, that's what this would be like. But we're not. Yes, there's threats, but within this city, we are still united. Why are we acting as if we are slave owners to one another? This is not right. Because of the situation, some people were taking advantage of others in need. And the thing is that the enemy loves to hit us where it hurts. The biggest place that the enemy will always go will be the unity amongst one another. In your family, in your marriage, in your church, in your life group. There are going to be things that are going to rise up, and you're just going to kind of not think anything of it. And all of a sudden, you're going to be like, wait, why am I at odds with this person? Or why is this person treating me unfairly? Or does this person understand? And if nobody steps up and does anything, this will just go on and on and on. And everything that we've worked hard to build will crumble in our business, in our lives, in our families. We see this in our families where it's my thing is bigger than your thing, right? My job is more important than your job. My time is more precious than your time. We see this in our church. My ministry is bigger than your ministry. Children's ministry is more important than facilities or whatever it is. We tend to build up our own ministry and say, God gave me this vision, so this must be the most important vision. But when we say that's my vision, then we're not saying this is God's vision together. It can get in, it's sinister. We also see this in the world. My safety, my security is more important than your safety or your security. As long as I'm okay, I don't care if you're okay or not. You see, when we act this way, this is when the enemy will tear us down. The thing that we are building will crumble to pieces. So the question is, how do we remedy this? The only way I believe that we can remedy this is by not compromising. Or to put it another way, we refuse to compromise. And this is the third thing that Nehemiah does. He remembers God, yes. He fortifies his defenses, yes. And then he refuses to compromise. He says, this is not right. And he goes to the leaders. He goes to those who have money, those who have been taking advantage, and says, you need to stop it now, and you need to pay back whatever you took. We don't have time today to read all of chapter 5, but if you just go back and read what Nehemiah does, it is an epic, epic account of a leader who steps in when something is not right, and he says, we have to do something about this. And he rights the wrongs. Not only does he right the wrongs, but he lives it out. He himself brings people to his table. He says, I will feed you. I will take care of you. Out of the resources God's given me, I am going to give to you. Nehemiah lives generously. And the great thing is that you all know how to live generously. We've already talked about that. But when we come up against opposition, when we are tempted to withhold for ourselves, we have to ask God, are you calling us to care for others who can't care for themselves? Because we have to refuse to compromise in every way. At the end of chapter 5:19, he prays this again. Again, another prayer and another remember. He says, remember me with favor, my God, for all that I have done for these people. When I get to the end of my ministry life or my actual life, I want to pray this prayer. But I don't want to pray it like desperately, like, God, please remember a couple of the good things I did because I don't want you to remember all the other stuff I did. I want to pray this honestly and earnestly. I can imagine that Nehemiah had a clear conscience when he prayed this to God. God, remember what I have done. We are called to live this way, to support one another, to bear one another's burdens, to provide for each other. We shore up our outer defenses. We also need to shore up our inner defenses of our lives because we're only as strong as our weakest part, right? Maybe you're in a life group and there's a need that's right in front of you all, and all of you are like, oh, well, I hope they figure it out. I've been there. I've done that. Instead, what does it look like to actually step up and care for one another? Maybe you're in a family and there's a need, and it's like, man, I hope somebody else figures that out for them. Maybe this is your call to show up for that person. Maybe you're in church and you've seen a need. Maybe God's calling you to sign up, step in, show up in some way, or your business, or whatever it might be, whatever God's called you to. How do we stand firm, and how do we actually stand against and refuse to compromise? You see, just because Nehemiah had already built half the wall by this time that this comes up, he had prepared the people for battle, he had righted the external turmoil and everything that's going on, he still had to face what was happening within his own camp. And sometimes we need to take a good, honest look at ourselves, our families, our lives, and say, if this isn't right, what else can we do? We've got to focus on what is right in front of us. Because the thing is, as much as this is going to happen, there's still going to be external noise, external opposition. And we go back in to Nehemiah, we now jump to chapter 6, where you would think, okay, they took care of the external opposition by putting guards, they took care of the internal stuff by paying everyone back, and everything was good. Not so much. Back to chapter 6, verse 2. Sanballat, again, and Geshem, new guy this time, sent me this message. Come, let us meet together in one of the villages on the plain of Ono. Ooh, that seems harmless enough. Sure. But they were scheming to harm me. No duh, Nehemiah. These guys aren't looking to make a deal. They're looking to harm him. Just because he had built this wall, prepared the people, it doesn't mean that the opposition went away. In fact, it's ratcheting up again because this time they've gone from death threats, which is pretty important and something to take seriously. They went from death threats to actually want to take him out in some way, shape, or form. It's not going to work with death threats. Great. What else can we do? Let's maybe blackmail him. Let's see how that goes. And so in verse 5, they actually try that. They're like, what if we just tell the king in Persia who sent you over here with all those goods and people, we're just going to tell him that you're trying to become the king. Like, we're just going to turn him against you. And you know what Nehemiah says to that? You can try. The king knows who I am. The king knows what I'm doing. That's no problem. And he literally just ignores what they're trying to do, right? So then they go from blackmail. They're like, well, blackmail's not going to work. What else could we do? Maybe we try some subterfuge. Maybe we kind of try to get him caught in something. And so verse 10 says this. Shemaiah, who's a prophet, said, hey, Nehemiah, let us meet in the house of God, inside the temple, and let us close the temple doors because men are coming to kill you. Essentially what he's trying to do is he's trying to get Nehemiah to run and hide. Be a coward, Nehemiah. Like, you know there's people that are trying to kill you. You know they're going to take you out, right? Just take the coward's way. But not only is it that, but he said, we're not just going to run away, but you're going to hide in the temple where no one else is supposed to go except for the priest. But Nehemiah, it's okay because you've been leading. You've been doing so great, man. Like, God told me I'm a prophet. Like, he told me to do this. So let's just go hide in the temple, okay? Nehemiah says, no, I refuse to compromise. I will not run away and defile God's house and defile myself by doing what you're trying to get me to do. You can't get me to do this. But sometimes, for us, when the opposition ratchets up enough, we can be tempted to fudge just a little, right? Can't we? Maybe you own a business and you're doing everything the right way. You've been like, God, I've been doing this for years and years. I'm doing it all the right way. And all of a sudden, the competition, they're doing better than me, or the economics around us have changed. It's like, if I just tweaked it just a little, if I just kind of fudged a little bit on those books, then maybe we could make it the next year. Don't compromise. Maybe you're trying to graduate, but you're struggling, right? You're like, man, if I only just use ChatGPT just a couple times to write a couple papers, no one's really it doesn't really matter. Don't compromise. Maybe being faithful to your partner. Someone you promised your life and your heart to, but it's gotten really hard, and you're like, well, there might be something else out there for me, maybe nicer, better. Don't compromise. Be faithful to what God has called you to be faithful to. Because the enemies that are out there, they're not always blatant. They're not always immediately like someone's coming against me trying to kill me. There's oftentimes, it's so much more subtle. Because remember, your enemy, the devil, prowls about like a roaring lion, looking for someone to devour. You don't want it to be you. When the going gets tough, when people force us or try to force us to compromise in any way, we're going to say no. Because we know God's called us to something greater. Because we remember who God is. We fortified our defenses. We're not going to compromise. And lastly, the last lesson that Nehemiah teaches us is ask for another brick. So not only do you refuse to be moved, you continue to build. You refuse to stop building. Go to verse 15. The wall was completed on the 25th day of Elul in 52 days. This is a wall that was about 2 miles in radius or so, they estimate. 9 to 10 feet thick, 20 feet high, and yet they completed it in 52 days. That's less than 2 months. That's crazy. I couldn't even fix a gate in my house in less than 2 months, you know? It's like they did this in 52 months. This is the last point I want to hit home today, is this, that when we stay the course, God will finish the work. When we stay the course, God will finish the work. When opposition comes, when things get hard, what are we tempted to do instead of to stay faithful? We're tempted to compromise. We're tempted to give up. We're tempted to stop building so we can provide for what we need. And yet God says, keep working because I've got you. God will finish the work. And the thing is, not only is God going to finish the work, we can also leave the opposition up to God. Sometimes I think if I don't handle the opposition, then that's going to take me out. Or if I don't do this, I have to take responsibility. I have to be the one to push people away or to say, I'm going to just do these things or I'm going to fight them off. And God says, just stand firm, be prepared, let me handle them for you. And that's exactly what he does for Nehemiah. Nehemiah 6:14, he says, remember Tobiah and Sanballat, my God, because of what they have done. Again, this is the imprecatory. God, would you remember them? Not so that you can bless them, but so that you will actually harm them because they've tried to come against you and come against us. And the amazing thing is that Nehemiah's prayer is answered just 2 verses later. Verse 16, when all our enemies heard about this, all the surrounding nations were afraid and they lost their self-confidence because they realized that this work had been done with the help of our God. They didn't lose heart because just the work was pretty great. They didn't lose heart because they had stationed some people with weapons. They lost heart because God did something miraculous. Friends, when you face opposition, and whatever it is, whether it's circumstantial or relational or financial, can you stand firm knowing that God, when he completes this work, will make others ashamed of their response to you? They lost their self-confidence. All throughout these last couple chapters, it doesn't seem like Sanballat had any lack of confidence, right? He was like, you idiots, what are you guys doing? This isn't gonna work. Nothing's gonna work. We're gonna kill you, we're gonna take you out. And without ever lifting a finger or even hardly responding, Nehemiah put them to shame. Not because he fought well, but because he followed God. Friends, for us today, whatever you're facing in your life, whatever obstacles are coming your way, the best way to silence opposition, whether it's circumstantial or people or whatever it might be, the best way is to just finish the job that you set out to do. Put your head down, pray to God, and say, God, I trust you, and that's all I need to do. To go back to what we said in the very beginning, we build something that lasts when we remember God, we fortify our defenses, we refuse compromise, and then we ask for another brick to keep building. Let's pray. Lord, today, each of us are facing things that we are building in our lives. We have been called by you to build. And there are places, I know, God, for each of us, for myself, where we're tempted to compromise, tempted to give up. When opposition has come against us, Lord, it's really hard to stay faithful to what you've called us to. So the first thing I pray, God, is that you would give us confidence right now in our hearts. A renewed sense of desire to obey you, to please you, to live for you, God, not for ourselves, not for our little kingdoms, not for our own goals, but for your kingdom, God, and your goals. God, I pray for those in this room who are in a state of maybe they have already compromised. Maybe they have let the enemy in different ways. Maybe they're feeling hopeless and beat down and destitute right now. Lord, would you, through your power of your Spirit, strengthen them right now? God, would you remind them that it is not over? That every time we pick up a brick and we pick up a weapon to protect, God, we are fighting to stay faithful to you. So God, I just pray that you would help each one of us today to build our lives on you, that we wouldn't think that we have to use the weapons of the world, God, to take out the enemies, but God, you are our weapon. You're the one that takes care of it. We don't have to worry. So Lord, we turn our hearts to you, we worship you, we give you everything, knowing that the only way that we can fight is by standing firm in you. Lord, we thank you for your message. We thank you for your word today. And would you strengthen us with your Spirit as we leave this place? We pray these things, Jesus, in your name. Amen.